Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer. Today joined by Chris Hattingh. Let's get into our first news story of today, and we're going to take put expropriation on the back burner for this episode, doing that as our second story. Our first story is going to instead address what appears to be the dissolution of the so-called progressive caucus. This was a parliamentary alliance formed between the MK party and the EFF, as well as a number of other smaller parties who were not included in the GNU. I believe the ATM is the other significant party in that bloc, who were going to propose radical economic and redistributive and all the sort of things that have been banging us around inside the ANC, MK, and the EFF forever, to change South Africa. Well, it looked at first like this might set the GNU up to have a formidable opponent in Parliament. The Progressive Caucus controlled a significant number of seats. When you take the EFF sort of 10% of seats, plus the MK's 14% of seats, you had about a quarter of Parliament that was part of this grouping. However, after the departure of the EFF by Floyd Shivambu, its deputy leader for MK, relations have really soured, and now it looks like the party is kind of over. Julius Malema said that the EFF wants absolutely nothing to do with MK. He said, quote, "When issues are raised in Parliament, whether MK is agreeing or not on any view we hold, it is an EFF view and we will express it. If they agree with our view, then we will both express it. But that doesn't make us anything. We are not anything. We literally don't want anything to do with MK. We even asked them not to come to the funerals of EFF members. We don't want to see them. Even us, we have stopped going to the Soweto Derby because we don't want to meet them by mistake." At the same time, the EFF has also dissolved its Student Leadership Command, or whatever they call it. Chris, it does look like, firstly, that a marriage which was essentially for competing for the same voters and saying the same thing in Parliament was not going to last. It's just too much in common, ironically, between the MK and the EFF, I think, for that agreement to last. But secondly, it seems like Malema just doesn't really know what to do. The EFF seemed increasingly adrift, and he's now anti the MK party. It seems entirely for personal reasons, because Floyd defected to them. But at the same time, his party is not able to differentiate itself on policy from MK. So what exactly is going on with the EFF here?
Yeah, I don't think this is a case of reverse psychology where Malema and the EFF say we don't want anything to do with MK, and then MK think, oh, what are we missing out on? Maybe there's some secret here that we don't know about, so we should actually try and approach them. I don't know if it's a bit of reverse psychology in terms of sort of a dating courtship, calculation that's going on here. But in all seriousness, after the elections, last year's elections, I've been saying that for the EFF and for Malema, a party that built themselves up on a platform of radical revolutionary ideology, if something else comes along that's more convincing, and you can have your concerns about MK, the leadership, the way it's going about things, but if something comes across that voters feel is more convincing in that revolutionary ideological narrative or mission, how do you then out-radical yourself or out-radical them? How do you continue to build on that? And if you run out of those ideas, maybe then you just flail around and you look for different ways to differentiate yourself. Then it becomes really a grab bag, trying to pick on the issue of the day or the topic of the day. I mean, mentioning the Soweto Derby, I mean, it was very topical this past weekend between Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates, but it's also not the best example of sort of revolutionary engagement for the proletariat kind of thing, is what the EFF is supposed to be. So do you just want to be in the news, or do you still want to keep maintaining your struggle, your revolution credentials? So it points to, I think, a bit of a crisis of confidence as well that is playing itself out within the EFF. It might come out of this, but if especially the leadership doesn't take the right lessons from the elections and their performance, it becomes an echo chamber. So, for example, you had Malema consolidating the leadership structures in the office of the president of the EFF after the elections. That could work if the leader and those around him are open to signals from the branches, from South Africans, and they rejig the party, do the work before the local government elections, etc. However, if they ignore that sort of feedback and they think, just continue on our track, we are the only ones with the knowledge, we're fine, it becomes that sort of vicious cycle of an echo chamber, and they just become more and more irrelevant. So yeah, I think concerning signals flashing on the dashboard for the EFF.
It's going to be very interesting to watch their performance in the local government election. One wonders whether they might have a similar trajectory to COPE, which initially got this huge number of MPs. It was actually about the same as what the EFF has now, sort of close to 40 MPs. And then began to fall apart, so that by the next local government election, suddenly they were losing seats all over the place, or just not doing that well. It'll be interesting to see whether the EFF continues to hold the balance of power as it does in so many municipalities across the country, where it's able to leverage the ANC for support there. That may quite shake up our local politics in some interesting ways if the EFF is unable to hold those voters. Where will they go? Back to the ANC, to a new party, to MK? I think it's too early to say. Okay, so that's an interesting development. It seems like the Progressive Caucus is in kind of disarray, or at least the Progressive Caucus is now MK and the ATM, and the EFF it doesn't seem to be playing the same role. So I don't quite know what to talk about for this next story. There are a number of news articles we considered talking about on this one, but I think I'm going to put it like this. I worry that the debate over the last couple of hours, the last day or two, around expropriation, the expropriation bill, has become a little bit unfocused now. There's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to kind of, I think, miss the forest for the trees here a little bit. A lot of people focused in on the wording of Donald Trump's statement on social media, saying that South African government was confiscating land. It isn't confiscating land. There's now debates about whether expropriation is the same as compensation, or whether, the laws are racially targeted, or whether they're just, or all these kind of things. And this is missing, for me, the point. There's this kind of reflexive desire to go, well, actually, Mr. Trump, you're wrong on this detail. That doesn't change. It doesn't matter whether Donald Trump said the moon is made of cheese. It's a bad piece of legislation that is going to scare off investment, hurt South Africans, take away some of our rights, in the sense that we will not have the same secure title to property as we did before. And it doesn't matter what Donald Trump tweets. This has, you can say, if you looked at this positively, that this has actually reinvigorated a debate that was far too, I think, was being ignored by a lot of people. The ANC in particular seemed to be trying to claim that this expropriation bill was no big deal and that everyone was fear-mongering about it. So we've had think pieces like this one in the Daily Maverick titled "Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and AfriForum, an unholy trinity pushing back on land reform," although it's a slightly weird headline because I don't think the piece really talks specifically about land reform per se, or makes much criticism of why EWC is needed for land reform. But anyway, even the DA has kind of put out this sort of, it seems like a reflexively defensive or trying to look patriotic statement. The DA said, and I'm going to read from their statement here: while the Act does need to be amended to meet the sequencing requirements as highlighted by Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Dean McPherson, there are also opportunities to deal with other concerns that have been raised in the public since the assertion to the Act. However, it is not true that the Act allows land to be seized by the state arbitrarily, and it does not require fair compensation for legitimate expropriation. And it does require fair compensation for legitimate expropriations in terms of Section 25 of the Constitution. It is unfortunate that individuals have sought to portray this Act as an amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for expropriation without compensation. Okay, so here's what kind of concerns me here. I mean, that's sort of all technically correct. And it's true that the expropriation bill is not nearly as dangerous as if the ANC and EFF had come to an agreement to change the Constitution to remove the clause about compensation. But the ANC, I believe, for a long time has taken the view that actually it didn't need to amend the Constitution in order to have expropriation without compensation. And that while the DA here is still saying it's opposed to the law, it's going to, wants it to be amended, wants it to be changed, it's a very big softening of the tone from a week ago when they were talking about maybe walking out of the government of national unity. And my concern is here that in the rush to sort of say, well, Trump is technically wrong on this point, we're missing the fact that this is still a very bad piece of legislation, and that even if it might be challenged in court, even if public pressure might force it to be amended, that doesn't change the fact that it's signing into law, I think, is a severe threat to investment in this country. Sorry, Chris, I've rambled a lot there. Your thoughts on any and all of that?
No, I'm very much in agreement in terms of the debate, the terms and the grounds of the debate having shifted from where they should have been, the focus on the actual details of the act. As, for example, IRR fellow Gabriel Krause in a piece on Business Day, I think published yesterday, so on the 3rd of February, very good response to another piece sort of extolling the virtues of the act, where Mr. Krause just goes piece by piece in terms of, for example, where the original author said there are 4 sort of conditions for expropriation, but actually there's 5 in the act, and all of this sort of stuff. I'm paraphrasing, but then Gabriel actually points out, let's just focus on the actual text of this thing and why it's bad in and of itself. You don't need to justify its badness to reference to other things. In and of itself, it dilutes South Africans' property rights. Yes, there are other things that could make it much worse, that could then lead to sort of land grabs and overnight capital flight and all that sort of thing. But it's another ingredient in that particular pot that you don't want when you ostensibly want to put the country on a pro-growth, pro-property rights, pro-reform, pro-constitutional land reform sort of trend. So I'm in agreement with how you've summarized it. Just on the sort of challenge maybe for the DA, I wonder if part of the thinking, so I'm trying to put myself in those discussions, is that given that the party is part of the GNU, there was, the statement last week that they would lodge a formal dispute as to how the act was signed. And now they're going to try and introduce some sort of changes or amendments. And of course, with their minister, Dean McPherson, in Public Works, in terms of the regulations that he would then have to implement. Maybe part of the thinking here, longer term, maybe it might be naive, but maybe the thinking is when you then go and discuss and engage with bodies like the Trump administration and others, and you can show that this current government is different from what came before. It's no longer the ANC as the sole majority party. There is feedback, there is changes, there are amendments, and this wouldn't have been the case before. Therefore, so this South African government and this business environment is a little bit different. There's not yet the tangible results. We don't have above 2% growth. We don't have unemployment down to 20%. So it's not to say those things have been fixed, but it's a different setup maybe that would, they think, present some more credible partner to the US, to US government, diplomats, to trade interests, investment interests, business interests. I wonder if that's part of what's going on. It could also really just be, all hands on deck trying to make sure that all the fires are extinguished, and at the end of the day, then undercutting themselves. So I'm not undermining that possibility.
Yeah, no, I am also just kind of generally wary of an attempt to fix bad legislation with good regulation. I think that that's likely to be very fraught with danger. And of course, even if you create the best regulations in the world that can prevent any abuse of a bad piece of legislation like this, another minister can come in and say, well, actually, this is a contravention of the law. I'm chucking out all these regulations. Bye-bye. And we have no idea how long the GNU is going to last. So that's a very real concern. The other point about this bill that I haven't seen a proper response to is the concern raised by our colleague, Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, that because of the way the expropriation bill defines expropriation, that that this creates a space where the ANC, perhaps cooperating with the EFF or MK, and the EFF looks very eager to cooperate with the ANC these days, may create a new bill which takes all land into custodianship of the state. This is another reason why this piece of legislation is not a great idea. It creates this kind of the space. Not to mention the fact that it's not super well written. It's got problems in its wording. Are improvements on land considered when expropriation with nil compensation happens, which is the same thing as expropriation without compensation? Let's not get too bogged up in the definitions here. Are improvements included? There is some dispute over this. that lawyers have pointed out. Just terrible piece. I think the debate is going in a bad direction right now, and it's very important that I think everyone stays focused on exactly what's wrong with this piece of legislation, rather than getting sidetracked into American culture war politics, which unfortunately I think a lot of commentators in the media are very interested in doing.
Sorry, Nick, just the last point to add on that piece. If one accepts the premise that Trump, Musk, and AfriForum are aiming at derailing land reform initiatives or progress in South Africa, then one should go and look at the millions of rands wasted in corrupt ends in various land reform programs, and why the government has dragged its feet on, for example, giving South African citizens title deeds, those citizens who were denied their property rights by previous governments before 1994. Then really go and talk about what has held back land reform in South Africa.
Yeah, exactly. This is the great myth that's been created by parts of the ANC and MK and the radicals in our politics, is that the obstacle to land reform programs has been the fact that people don't want to sell. Well, no, the problem is that the Department of Land Reform is really badly run. It doesn't run its projects properly. And that most South Africans, when they go through one of these processes, they don't opt to get land, they opt to get money, because land is really not as all it's cracked up to be, particularly if you don't have the skills or capital to develop it properly, which unfortunately far too few South Africans have, because we have such poverty and unemployment in this country. Just a very last comment here. There is some talk that Trump is going to appoint Joel Pollak as the ambassador to South Africa. And we don't know whether that is going to happen. There's been some speculation about this. But I think that this would actually be a very good move for the Americans. Joel Pollak has a history as I think he was a speechwriter for Tony Leon in the DA back in the day. There's been criticism of him because he's affiliated with the website Breitbart. And honestly, I don't know everything he's written there, so I'm sure he's written something I vehemently disagree with. But the fact is, I think more so than perhaps any other appointment to the ambassadorship in South Africa, he may well understand South Africa's politics far better than anyone else. He'll understand the dynamic, I think, between the DA and the ANC far better than probably any other ambassador. Trump's previous appointment, Lana Marx, I think was her name. She was, she grew up in South Africa and she could speak Xhosa and Afrikaans, but she never gave me the impression she was sort of deeply enmeshed in our politics. Ruben Brighty as well. I have respect for him. I thought he was quite a cool ambassador from the US, but I think he was he just didn't have that kind of intimate knowledge of South African politics and how it was working, which I think Joel Pollak will have. And I think the ANC should be very concerned that Trump may appoint Pollak, because I think he's invested in South Africa in a way that a lot of ambassadorial appointments wouldn't be. And he actually understands how the country works here. He gave an interview to News 24 where he said that, quote, Trump is going to play hardball. SA has adopted a set of economic and foreign policies that are at odds with Western norms, and he wants to see those policies change. For instance, black economic empowerment is a huge problem for investors. In this country, businesses and governments are unraveling race-based policies. Trump ran on getting rid of these policies and received a record share of the vote from racial minorities. There is no appetite in the US for racial policies in investment or anywhere else. And I think that there shows just how well, it's a really good line to take, how well he understands some of the debates we have in this country, and that he's going to be a formidable opponent for the ANC if Trump appoints him. Do you agree with me, Chris?
Yeah, I think to really capture maybe cutting through the noise sort of quality that he might bring to the position. Not that he won't, observe the office and all that sort of stuff, but just not really having time for things, talking about the quote unquote global South and sustainability, but focusing on, economic matters, trade, bilateral trade relations between South Africa and the US. And unfortunately for some political parties in South Africa, that does put them on the spot, because then you need to commit and engage on those terms. You can't waffle as much as you would have done in the past, get yourself, then almost in a way you have to get away from those terms that force you to not commit to, that allow you to not commit to something, because then you can't assess it as a failure or a success. Now you've actually got to come to the table. So maybe we'll see South Africa rise to that challenge, but time will tell. But I think that the challenge is clear. So it's up to up to the South African government, the cabinet, its diplomatic call, what it takes from this potential incoming. It's what's happened this week with President Trump's comments. This sort of thing was coming. I think that it came so early in his administration was a surprise, but it was coming. Yeah. And arguably, what did the South African government do to prepare itself, to increase its dialogue in Washington? Arguably, clearly not enough, but it's within its own ambit. Yeah. So now you know that Pollack might be an ambassador. Deal with it accordingly.
And if he's the ambassador, we won't just be able to sort of waffle our way through, which I think the government has often relied on doing, which I think won't work if he gets appointed as ambassador. But we don't know. Maybe this is just a hypothetical when he won't be the ambassador. But anyway. Okay, we've gone long. Thank you for listening. We hope you found the show interesting. And we will be back tomorrow with the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone. The Daily Friend Show and the Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.